Coming up this week on the GCN Racing News Show, the rather special 2020 road season has concluded with Labwelter and the Ceratizit Challenge. We will take a look back at those two races, plus we have got the European Cyclo-cross Championships and all the latest transfer and retirement news too. And there's been a lot on that front. We shall start with Labwelter, though. And my word, what can you say about Primoz Roglic? Firstly, I was surprised he was even on the start line, given the season that he'd had already before it. I was then surprised at the form he came into the race with, winning on the very first stage. And then I was astounded that he managed to keep that form through to the finish and take the overall victory. I mean, the man really is like a robot, both physically and mentally. Yes, he does occasionally show a little weakness. He even got beaten, of course, at the Tour de France. But his level of consistency, his resilience, is something I haven't seen in a pro male rider for quite some time. And let's not forget, he also won Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which means he's the first rider to have won a Monument and a Grand Tour in the same year, since Danilo De Luca did it back in 2007. He is also the 8th rider in history to have finished on the podium of 2 Grand Tours in 2 consecutive years. He's a thoroughly deserving winner of Labwelter, and I think even Carapaz and Carfi fans would be hard-pushed to disagree with that. So, he finishes this season with 50 race days, 12 wins, 10 second places, 32 top 10s, a huge number of new fans, and a lot of respect. Now, of course, he's also got a lot to thank his Jumbo-Visma teammates for. At Labwelter, for example, Jonas van der Gaard really stepped up to the mark in the mountains. Paul Martins was the veteran stalwart who took up the pace setting at the start of many stages. Robert Gesink, the road captain, he was able to ride an infernal pace on the early climbs. George Bennett even managed to net 12th place on GC himself. And then there's Sepp Kuss, who I think I can safely crown as the best mountain domestique of the 2020 season. Although, there were some unbelievable scenes on the final mountain stage where he grimaced and actually had to breathe through his mouth. In some ways, though, it's quite reassuring to have some kind of confirmation that he is human after all. And finally, at the Vuelta for that team, there was Leonard Hofstetter. On Saturday, he was in the early breakaway, and when Roglic was distanced by Carapaz and showing a little bit of weakness, he was there just when it mattered. Now, he may only have pulled for a couple of minutes, but the difference he would have made physically and psychologically to Roglic were vital in those closing kilometres, where everything could have been lost for the second Grand Tour of the season. It was also, though, the first time in 37 years that bonus seconds have decided the outcome of a Grand Tour. That was back when Giuseppe Cerrone beat Roberto Vicentini. Without bonus seconds at La Vuelta, Richard Carapaz would have won the race by 8 seconds. Now, that is an interesting statistic, but it's not to take anything away from what Roglic achieved. He was the most complete rider with the most complete team. He can climb, he can time trial, and he can even sprint. And actually, it was the latter that allowed him to pick up a total of 48 bonus seconds through 3 road stage wins and 3 second places. And if this year is anything to go by, the ability to pick up bonus seconds is going to get more and more important. For the first time in history, all 3 Grand Tours were won by less than a minute. Now, we weren't sure we were even going to get any racing this summer and autumn, were we? But in the end, we have had a lot, and almost all of it has been nothing short of brilliant. Now, you may want to vote for Roglic or someone else in our World of Cycling End of Season Awards. Basically, we want you to vote on various awards, amongst them Breakthrough of the Year, Male and Female Rider of the Year, Team of the Year, and indeed Race of the Year. Here's a quick promo to get you excited. Unfortunately, the road season has now finished, but what a season we ended up having this year. Here at GCN, we want to celebrate it with our first ever annual awards show on the world of cycling. We want you to vote on the best of 2020. Which ride had you jumping out of your seat? Which teamwork impressed you the most? And what performance had you rubbing your eyes in utter disbelief? You're able to cast your votes right now, so please make sure you get involved, and then you'll be able to find out who the various winners of the awards were on our end of season World of Cycling special on Wednesday the 18th of November. It's completely free over on GCN's Race Pass, or they'll be sure to highlight on our YouTube and Facebook pages. So please make sure you get involved and have your say. You can find a link to the voting polls in the description below this video. And the winners of those polls will be announced on the final World of Cycling episode for 2020, which comes on Wednesday, the 18th of November. Si will be joined on that one by Hannah Barnes and Connor Swift. A few more key points though now from Labwelter. First up, Alejandro Valverde picked up his 20th career top 10 placing in a Grand Tour GC yesterday. Something that's never before been achieved, and I'm finding it quite hard to imagine it will ever be achieved again. Age though does appear to be catching up with him a little bit, but he's still right up there. Chris Froome, meanwhile, rode his final race for Ineos Grenadiers yesterday, and although 98th on GC was his worst ever result in a Grand Tour, he did appear to be improving with each stage. And I think we're all quite intrigued, aren't we, as to how he's going to fare next year as team leader for the Israel Startup Nation. He did receive his trophy, though, as winner of the 2011 Vuelta a España. Juan Jose Cobo was recently stripped of that title after doping charges, and so Froome was officially awarded with the title on the morning of the final stage. The Frenchman David Gaudu of Groupama FDJ had a bit of a coming of age at Labwelter. His win on stage 11 was the biggest of his career, and then he backed that up with another win on stage 17, as well as 7th on the general classification. We'll have to wait and see now whether he can make another leap forward next season and maybe be a co-team leader with Thibaut Pinot at his team. Meanwhile, his countryman Guillaume Martin of Team Cofidis was like the Duracell bunny. He was in pretty much every break that mattered in the high mountains and comfortably took home the prize of best climber. Richard Carapaz of Ineos Grenadiers also has to be applauded, of course. I mean, let's not forget, his big aim for this season was the defence of his Giro d'Italia crown, but in the end, that was the only Grand Tour that he didn't ride. He gifted a stage win to Michał Kwiatkowski at the Tour de France and then rode fantastically well at La Vuelta. And you've got to say, had his team been as strong as Jumbo-Visma, he might well have been able to win the race. A lot of ifs and buts with that, but they were notable by their absence at some of the key points of the race. Hugh Carthy, well, I think that man won himself a huge number of fans by the way that he was riding over the 3 weeks, and indeed through his interviews after each stage at La Vuelta. He's never finished before in the top 10 of a Grand Tour, but now he has a podium placing to his name. And in fact, it's the first time since 2005 that the 3 podium spots of La Vuelta have all been filled by riders who finished the Tour de France. And finally, Dan Martin, at 34 years of age, he's taken his best overall result at a Grand Tour with 4th, plus of course that stage win along the way. Now, before we move on, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to every single one of you who's been watching our live coverage and highlights and post-race breakaway shows over on Race Pass. Now, I honestly still have to pinch myself sometimes to think that we're now able to show the biggest bike races in the world. This has, of course, been an absolutely huge project for many of us here at GCN, and one that we've been working on for a very long time. Since launching on August the 1st this year, we have been overwhelmed, not only with the level of excitement and racing that we've had the pleasure of broadcasting, but also with your response and enthusiasm to it. And I can't tell you how much your support is appreciated. Yes, we do know very well that there's plenty to improve upon, but rest assured, we'll be spending a lot of time making those improvements before the start of the next road season. We have incidentally already received a lot of suggestions as to how we can improve the product, but if you've got any of your own, please feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. I will personally read them all. We basically want to make Race Pass the best platform for all things bike racing, and since you're all passionate fans of the sport as well, your feedback is really important in helping us to achieve that goal. Now, yesterday, the 3-day Ceratizit Challenge concluded in Madrid in Spain. It was the final event of the 2020 Women's World Tour calendar. Stage 1 got off to a slightly shaky start in that the peloton was sent off course momentarily. Thankfully, it all ran smoothly in the end on that day, particularly in fact for Lorena Wiebes of Team Sunweb. She sprinted to a convincing win on the day. Now, I think we can safely say now that she is the best sprinter in the women's pro peloton. She hasn't raced a huge amount this year, but of the 11 days that she has raced, she's taken 5 wins, which is not a bad strike rate. The GC, though, was always set to be shuffled around on stage 2, being a short time trial, and that was won by Lisa Brennauer, the German from Ceratizit's team herself. She finished just a single second ahead of Elisa Longo Borghini of Trek Segafredo. Brennau and her team, though, had to work hard to defend that lead on the final stage. Lorena Wiebes was consistently getting the better of her on the all-important sprints for bonus seconds in the early stages of the race. And just as she started to fade, Longo Borghini went onto the attack and incidentally into the virtual race lead. However, Ceratizit rode well for Brennau in the closing stages, safely delivering her to the line and the overall victory. The stage itself ended up in a bunt sprint. Wiebes the first to launch hers, but Aliso Balsamo of Valcar Travel and Service managed to get around her before the finish line. And that was a brilliant win for the 22-year-old Italian. That race also marked the final one for Annemiek van Vleuten in Mitchelton Scott colours. She ended the race in 6th place overall, but will be in blue next year with Team Movistar. I must also say a huge well done to the organisers of that race. They managed to run it against all odds, and also in fact the organiser of every single other pro race this year. I for one did not expect to see as much racing as we ended up having this year, and so I have to applaud the people who put them on under the most difficult of circumstances. Cyclo-cross now, and it was the European Championships at the weekend. Held in Roosendaal in the Netherlands, the course was designed by former cyclo-cross world champion Richard Groenendaal, and it featured several natural and artificial obstacles and lots of speed changes en route. However, with good weather and almost no rain leading up to the event, the women's race was dry and very, very fast. Now, the course featured 2 long sand sections, plus several off-camber embankments that challenged riders, as well as some deep ruts as well. Off the start line, it was the Italian national champion Eva Lechner who took the whole shot, but by the end of the first lap, a group of 3 of the favourites had pulled clear: Anne-Marie Vorst, Ceylin del Carmen Alvarado and Lucinda Brandt. They played a game of musical chairs throughout the race. After being gapped off by Alvarado and Anne-Marie Vorst coming into the last lap, Lucinda Brandt reconnected with those 2 and immediately put on an attack that brought her almost all the way to the finish line. However, 3/4 of the way through that last lap, Alvarado retook the lead and was able to put Vorst under pressure. Although she didn't completely crack her. It ended up in a sprint between those 2, but it went to the way of the world champion, who now adds the European Championships to her ever-increasing list of impressive wins. Lucinda Brandt rounded out the podium in 3rd place, making it a Dutch clean sweep of the podium. In the men's race, meanwhile, it was Elie Iserbyt and Michael van Turenhout who managed to prize themselves clear of the rest on the 3rd lap of 9. Teammates with both their trade teams and their national teams, it was soon clear that the title would be fought out between the 2 of them. For a few laps, Van Turenhout looked every bit Iserbyt's match, but an acceleration from the 23-year-old opened up a small gap with 3 laps remaining, and there was nothing that his compatriot could do to respond. Race over, basically. Iserbyt has been the rider of the early season, just as he was this time last year, but as ever, I think we are all anticipating the return of Van der Poel and Van Aert to see how they all compare. Has Iserbyt stepped it up to match or even beat them? Well, we shall see very soon. Now, whilst the Dutch have that stranglehold over women's cyclocross and probably road racing indeed at the moment, the Belgians are still the nation to beat on the men's cyclocross side. They finished 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th and 6th, with only Lars van der Haar of the Netherlands able to separate them all by finishing 3rd, and then the Spaniard Felipe Orts in 7th. In other news, there were rumours flying about last week that Dylan Groenewegen would receive a 9-month ban from racing for that incident at the Tour of Poland back in August. The Dutchman has not competed since then, and he's spoken of his own difficulties in mentally dealing with the guilt that he's been feeling. The crash, of course, left Fabio Jakobsen with some severe injuries, and he has recently undergone facial reconstruction surgery, but remains hopeful of making a full recovery. Now, the reports of that potential ban came on the Wielerfits website, and if true, it would mean that Groenewegen will be out until the 6th of May next year. And I've actually been trying to figure out how I feel about this decision, if it's true. Because on the one hand, it'll send out a very strong message to all sprinters as to how they should or shouldn't act in the final few hundred metres of a race. But then on the other hand, I kind of feel like the punishment is for the consequence of the action as opposed to the action itself. Either way, I do sincerely hope, of course, that Jakobsen makes a full recovery, but also that Groenewegen doesn't suffer mentally for the rest of his career or his life. Anyway, we are now going to move on to some transfer news. And in this rather strange year, there's actually a hell of a lot to get through. Now, it was revealed recently that Wanty Group Gobert, the Belgian squad, will take over the World Tour licence from CCC next year. And it looks like there's a little bit of a merger going on too. At least a few of the riders are moving across with the licence. Georg Zimmermann, Jonas Koch and Jan Hirt all transferring over to Wanty for next year. Meanwhile, in Italy, former Italian champion Giovanni Visconti will continue racing for another year. He moves to the Bardiani CSF team from Vinny Zabu KTM, and that is going to be his 17th season as a pro rider. Leah Thomas, the American, who was with Bigla Katusha and Paul Ricard for the last couple of years, will next year transition to Team Movistar, which is of course the new home of Annemiek van Vleuten. Whilst van Vleuten's current team, Mitchelton Scott, have signed Urska Ziegart from Ali BTC Ljubljana, so congratulations to her. A couple of fairly high-profile riders have announced their retirement in the last couple of weeks. First up, Ian Stannard, the Brit, affectionately known as Yogi. He spent the last 11 years with Team Sky / Ineos, but is suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, which has forced him to hang up his wheels earlier than planned. We wish Ian all the best for his future, as indeed we do for Lucy Garner. Now, I missed her announcement in September, in fact, that she'd be finishing at the end of this year, but her last race was yesterday at the Ceratizit Challenge. She was back-to-back world champion as a junior, but her biggest win as a pro came at the start of this year, where she won Stage 1 and the GC at the Dubai Tour. Johan Alfredo, the Frenchman, is another man who's been forced to retire early, this time due to an ankle injury that he can't seem to fix. He actually gave a very emotional interview to L'Equipe in France, where he talked about his struggles that he's been having mentally with the transition away from full-time athlete. And yes, it is not easy for a lot of cyclists to move away from the sport. Pretty much all of them know that they've got a fantastic job and one which many other people would like to be doing, but despite, or perhaps because of that, the next step of your life can be very hard when you've only ever worked towards one thing. And I sincerely hope Johan can find his way sooner rather than later. And there are plenty more riders out there who might be forced into retirement at the end of this year because they're still without contract. So, for example, riders like Will Barter, who was second to Primoz Roglic by just a single second at the Vuelta individual time trial, Dimitri Claes, who was 6th at the Tour of Flanders this year, Julien Vermont, Stijn van den Berg. The list basically goes on because they're all looking for contracts at the moment. It's particularly hard out there this year, isn't it? Even world hour record holder Victor Campenaerts, who stated that he's willing to take a significant pay cut in order to be able to continue racing next year, has yet to find himself a contract. On that front though, it looks like all is not quite lost yet for Doug Ryder. The South African manager of NTT last week said that they should be able to make a positive announcement about the future of the team this week. Fingers crossed for that. And finally, there has been a contract extension for Lewis Hamilton at Mitchelton Scott, and he's been promoted to GC leader at the Grand Tours. The team are of course losing Adam Yates to Ineos next year, and with Esteban Chavez not yet managing to get back to the kind of form that saw him finish on the podium at the Vuelta and the Giro, it is a good opportunity for Hamilton, and one that I can say that he's earned. Right, I'm off now to hibernate for the winter. I hope you've all enjoyed this year's racing as much as I have. Thanks again for watching and for supporting us over the past few months. It really is much appreciated. Next week, Connor will be back with the best and most impressive stats from the revised 2020 season. Take care, everyone. I will see you very soon. Bye for now.